Hey everybody, it's Mike with Inflatable Boarder.
And Bill from SupboardGuide.com.
And welcome to Paddleboard Fact or Fiction. We're going to break down some different myths, misconceptions, maybe some folklore around paddleboarding or paddleboarding techniques, and really kind of get in there and see what's true, what's not, and what's somewhere in between.
It's amazing that this sport's only been going less than 20 years, but already there's a whole lot of mythology has crept in. Things that people just take for granted. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. So we're going to use our combined 30 years of paddleboarding experience to have a go at busting some of these myths wide open.
Absolutely. And so today we are going to talk about one of the biggest ones in the industry, one of the most fought about ones, I think, which is better, an inflatable paddleboard or a hard paddleboard? Bill, what's the answer?
Yep, well, this really is an interesting one because, I mean, if you just look at sales figures, then the jury's out, the verdict's in. 90% of all paddleboards sold are inflatables. So surely inflatables are better, right? But you speak to any of the hardcore experienced long-time paddlers and they'll all say, nah, hardboards are better. They're better performing. They work better. When you change from an inflatable to a hardboard, you never go back. Now, I have been working with inflatables for 15 years, and I reckon that's a myth. So I'm very happy to have this discussion, and let's see what we find.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we should start out with just some really basic ideas about what we know are better with one versus the other. So I'll start that off with just saying transportation and accessibility are a huge plus for inflatables. It's being able to throw an entire paddleboard or 2 or 4 or 5 into your car and not have to worry about a roof rack and tying things down and heading to the beach is a huge plus for inflatables. And they're easy to get. You can ship them, you can mail them, you don't have to find a local shop. I think that's a huge plus.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. And to be fair, I think even the most hardcore hardboard aficionados would agree with that one. Inflatables win hands down when it comes to transportation, storage, that sort of thing. And the sheer damn convenience of not needing a roof rack, not needing to put the board on the top of the car or whatever. Inflatables win a whole bunch of ones on that. The next one, I guess, to talk about is the durability one, which kind of goes both ways, doesn't it? I mean, on the one hand, you can take your inflatable and you can kick it down the steps, you can run over it with your truck, you're not going to hurt it, but then when it comes to the end of the life, a lot of inflatables, especially, shall we say, the lower cost ones, can often maybe only give you a few seasons before they rip down a seam. And the hardboard aficionados will come straight back on that one and go, yeah, but my hardboard will last forever. So, yeah, don't know what you think of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think there's definitely something there. And when you look at the quality level of inflatables, it runs a huge gamut. But the same for hardboards, too. There are some really cheap injection molded paddleboards you can get at Dick's Sporting Goods and it's or whatever in New Zealand the local sporting goods shop is there. But and I will also say, though, that I think it's all about care and maintenance. And anything, if you treat it like garbage, it's going to end up in the garbage. And if you treat it well, it's going to stick around for a while. So, that is a little bit too on the user, both ways.
Yeah, it is, yeah. I mean, in my paddleboard school, I've still got some inflatables that are nearly 12 years old now. Some only last 4 or 5 years. But what I do notice, though, is, I mean, like most people who've got a paddleboarding school, I have used hardboards from time to time. And hardboards, after a few years of hard use in a paddleboard school, they end up looking like they've been attacked by a cheese grater. They are just scuffed and scratched and dinged and dented, and there's lots of filler in them. Whereas some of my inflatables, I could give them a wipe down with a bit of kitchen cleaning fluid, and they still look good as new.
Absolutely agree. I will also give a benefit to hardboards for time required to get ready once you're at the water. With a hardboard, you pop in your fin, you pop on your leash, you pop on the water. With inflatable, you do have to inflate the board if it's not already inflated. which anymore is coming down to almost not being a difference anyway, with some of the newer electric pumps out there that inflate these things in 5 minutes. 5 minutes versus 2 minutes is not a whole lot of difference when you're getting ready to get on the water there.
Yeah. I mean, good point. Yeah, and also, I have to say myself, I do tend to keep my inflatable on the roof rack. I just use it as a hardboard.
Yeah.
And just the other day, I was untying my board from the roof rack, and a gust of wind came along, and my inflatable flew off the roof rack, bounced across the car park, and hit a car. And I went over, picked my board up, apologised to the car owner, and walked off. No damage done to me, board, car, roof rack, car park, or anything. If that had been a hardboard, I'd probably still be in court proceedings now. So yeah, inflatables do have some advantages in that.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about the physical differences and which might be better or not, but let's get to the meat of it. Everyone wants to know, what on the water, what's the difference, which one's better, and I think the best way to do this is going to be maybe break it down by type of board first, and then kind of compare different things like speed and stability and all those fun performance features. How does that sound?
Yeah, I reckon that's a really good idea, Mike. I'm going to just start this off by throwing out there that the main reason why so many people, when they move from an inflatable to a hardboard, think that there's a big difference is simply because they're not comparing like with like. The vast majority of inflatable boards are actually quite big, as you know, 32, 33, 34, maybe 35 inches wide. Hardly anyone makes a hardboard of that width. So often what people are doing is they're going from a big board to a much smaller board, and then they're going, wow, this board feels really lively and light underfoot. But actually, it's not anything to do with the construction. It's about the size and shape of the board. And I think we're going to be returning to this point quite often in this discussion.
Bill, you're currently in New Zealand where you live most of the year, and I'm here in New Mexico where I live most of the year. But this spring we were able to get together and do some paddling. And so we actually did compare some of these hardboards and inflatables together. And that was the first concern we had, was making sure that we could match size and shape. And so we picked a couple of hardboards and picked a couple of inflatable boards that we got as close as possible to what we could on shape and size. So let's...
You did a really good job with that, Mike. I was very
Thanks.
impressed. You actually did manage to get some really close matches, and that was very useful because it threw away that whole issue of you can't compare a 34-inch whiteboard to a 32-inch whiteboard and whatever.
Right. So starting off with some all-around boards, the hardboard that we went with is a 10.5 by about 32 and a half. It's a cruiser style hardboard from level 6 called their 10.6 cruiser. And we did compare that with two different inflatables. And we chose the Honu Byron and the Glide O2 Retro. Again, we chose those based primarily on their shape, but the reason we chose two inflatables was because of the thickness differences. And Bill, do you want to talk about thickness of, maybe talk about, in general, thickness of paddleboards, what that does, and then kind of what a hardboard thickness is and what an inflatable thickness is?
Yeah, sure, because absolutely it's a major factor. When people make hardboards, they make them with the amount of volume that they want to put in specific places, like under how much volume does the board need under the rider's feet, how much does it need in the nose, in the tail, that sort of thing. Whereas when inflatables are made, thickness plays a completely different role. The designers use thickness to put stability and stiffness into the board, which is why the vast majority of inflatables out there now are 6 inches thick, because that makes the board real stiff. But you don't see any hardboards out there 6 inches thick, simply because that's a whole lot of volume and a whole lot of material and a whole lot of weight, and it doesn't actually do a great deal for the performance of the board. So we have found this kind of break in inflatable boards whereby some of the manufacturers who have really mastered making a stiff board have been able to go to a thinner board down to 4.7 or even 4 inches.
Yeah, and I, for me personally, I'm a bigger paddler. I'm 215 pounds, and so you get into inflatables and rigidity, and it really makes a big difference for me. One thing with with thinner inflatable boards, I still really love to paddle. And the Honu Byron is one of my favorite all-around boards. It does feel very different. It feels kind of like you said earlier, it feels a little livelier, a little sportier, and it's because it's lower volume. And so it doesn't support me as much as a 6-inch thick board does. It's not quite as beginner friendly because of that, but it also does kind of lower that center of gravity a little bit, give you a little bit more stability there. I think there's some other things we could talk about with thickness, but maybe we're outside the purview of this video. We can come back to. But compared to a 6-inch board, I do feel like you feel a difference. Maybe for a new paddler, you aren't going to experience a difference unless you are comparing them, though. Would you agree with that? If you're a new paddler, you jump on a 6-inch board, you're not going to feel like, oh, this is so high off the water that, I can't possibly use this.
No, I think you're right. But I do think it does play a big part again in why so many people um, feel a very big difference when they get onto their first hardboard is simply because it's thinner.
So let's take a look at some of this video that we shot. Let me get this going here. And we'll start off with this comparison with the Honu Byron and the Level 6 that are both roughly, the Honu Byron is 4.7 inches and the Level 6 is about 4 inches. Okay, so we'll start off. We got some nice slow motion video here. And there's Bill and I. Bill, you're on the Level 6 and I'm on the Honu. And we'll play just a few strokes here and then we'll kind of maybe break it down again.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? If you showed that to somebody who didn't know anything about paddleboarding and said, which of those is a bag of air and which is a hardboard, they would struggle to tell.
I think so. And, my experience as a guide and instructor teaching people on inflatable boards, wow. I often get the question of, are these hard or are these inflatable? They don't even know on them. And that's not even just watching, that's just being on them. So a couple things here that I think we can point out. In this side-by-side, you can see that we are taking, basically we have the same stroke rate, we're taking the same size strokes, and the boards are moving pretty much the same speed. One isn't inherently faster than the other, one's not gliding a lot faster than the other, or a lot farther than the other. And I think here is probably the biggest difference you can see. And Bill, I know you can see it. I'm not sure if our viewers will pick it out until you say, but I will let you point out what the biggest difference is here that you're seeing.
Okay, but you put me on the spot there. I assume you're referring to the fact that the hardboard on the left has just got a little bit more roll on it, and the rails are just coming down slightly, whereas the inflatable is tracking more straight and true through the water. Is this what you're referring to?
Actually, no. That's really interesting. That's great. So you're seeing a little bit more turning, a little more a little less tracking with the hardboard and a little more tracking with the inflatable is what you're saying.
Yes, but also because the hardboard has got a little bit less volume in the rails, my stroke, even though when I paddle, I try and maintain even weight on each foot. The board is just rocking a little bit more from side to side.
Yeah, I see that. What I saw first was the difference in the bow wake. And when we see the water coming off the board, it's sliding a little bit easier under the hardboard on the left, and it's kind of it's pushing a little bit more with the inflatable on the right. And I think this is a big source of the hardboards are more efficient than inflatables because they glide better. And I think what we're really seeing here is a difference in the rocker profile and the shape of the board. Would you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the one.
Again, I'd suggest it's not down to the construction per se, although it could be argued that it is because you cannot put a continuous rocker profile into an inflatable. As we can see perfectly as that video comes round, the rocker line on a inflatable is straight and then a turn up at the end. So you end up with that little bit of convex up front of the board, which always tends to push just a little bit more water, whereas the rocker line on the hardboard is kind of smoother and more continuous, and you haven't got that kind of more abrupt convex up front.
I absolutely agree with that. And you know the rails. So you mentioned in the rolling side to side as you're taking the paddle strokes. You know the rails on most hardboards are here's rocking side to side. You know most hardboards, if you were to look at them, you know straight on, they're going to be the rails are going to be shaped a bit like this, where they're flatter on the bottom and they've got kind of this like almost triangular shape to them, whereas the rails on most inflatables, if I can orient my hands right, are going to be more of a continuous curve or even a like a bracket, so a parentheses or a bracket. And as the board tilts, whether you're paddling or like what we were just doing, wobbling side to side, the inflatable might be a little bit taller, but those thinner rails, they engage that water better. And I think with SUP's history and surfing and everything, I think that is a lot of where this comes from as well. And we'll get into that in a bit. But having that engagement lets you really dig the rail in. And when you don't want that, it can actually be an issue. You can catch the water, and it can make it harder to be stable. Whereas the taller rails or the more evenly rounded rails tend to be a little bit smoother as they interact. They're not biting as hard. And we can go back and watch that again. So that's another thing that I was seeing there, that actually you might feel a little bit more stable if you do happen to catch a side. It's not a primary stability. It's more of a edge case, pardon the pun. But that's something that I see there as well, both as we're paddling and as we're rocking back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the traditionally, got to remember where all these board designs come from. Anyone who's designing hardboards pretty much is probably coming from something like a surfing background, where we're talking about a whole lot more dynamic action and the way the board moves through the water. You certainly don't want thick rails when you're trying to catch a wave. And so that kind of history, that's, what's the word? The genealogy of our boards, hardboards, is always coming back to that. There's no point putting more volume in the rail than you need. But inflatables, it's got to be there. And
Yeah.
you do notice that difference in that terms of sort of secondary stability. There is more support when you go out to the edge because there's just more volume there to support you. End of story.
The next example is the Level 6 10.6 and the Glide O2 Retro. And again, we chose this because of the plan shape, I think is how you refer to it, the outline, being very, very similar. And what we're seeing here, again, I'm seeing, the first thing I see is that rocker difference, and the Glide pushing a lot more water. And when you look at these boards from the side, and I do have photos of that we'll bring up here on the screen, you can see the Glide is just built super flat. So that's why that's pushing so much, not because it's inflatable, because it just doesn't have any rocker in the nose.
Yeah, absolutely. Conversely, what we can clearly see here compared to when you were on the Honu Byron, is that this board really is flat, isn't it? As you say, you're a bigger guy, but this board is not showing any distortion under your weight at all.
Yeah.
And as you were saying earlier, the fact that it's got that 6 inches of thickness, it is giving you brilliant support. And if it wasn't for the fact that this board is just pushing a little bit more water, in terms of comfort on the board, you're looking great there. And
Yeah.
again, there's very, very little difference in speed that we're seeing here, is there?
Yeah, and actually, I believe the Glide might even be an inch wider than the 10.6 here. I'd have to go back and double check, but I think it's actually, I think it's 33 and a half. I think it's a little bit wider even. And yeah, there's no slowdown. There's no obvious efficiency differences. I'm not working hard in these videos. I don't think you are either, Bill. And they're both just very, very similar. I think it's you mentioned this before we started recording, but it's just hard to tell the difference between the two on a lot of these.
When, for me, being a little bit lighter, when I'm on the glide, I am aware that I'm slightly higher off the water, but that's a kind of subjective thing. It's not a clear performance difference. Really, the only performance difference we're seeing here is, as we've said, down to the rocker line of the glide, meaning that it is pushing a bit more water, as we can see here in the vid. But still, it's a minor thing, and it is nothing to do with the actual fact that one is a bag of air and the other is fiberglass.
And Bill, just watching these videos, I can't wait for synchronized paddleboarding to make it to the Olympics. We're doing a really good job on keeping these paddle strokes and turns really, really cohesive there.
It's for 2028, Mike, I reckon.
Yeah, we'll have to petition to see if we can get in there. So again, seeing the rocking side to side, and I mean, you see how much I'm moving that board, and the deck is barely making it to the surface. Whereas just a little bit of chop on the level 6 there is sinking the whole rail, all the way up to your foot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as you mentioned, the thickness differences. I think we actually have a shot. Yeah, here we go. Seeing how much lower the board is in the water for you there, and this is you on there. And if you look at the specs on these boards, I think I'm actually within spec for this paddleboard. We're pretty close to it. But for me, paddling this particular hardboard is actually really hard because I do sink it quite a bit, even though it's the same size almost as that Honu Byron. But because they've taken the volume out of the tail, and out of the nose, and out of the rails, it reduces the flotation there just enough to make it fairly tricky for me to use comfortably, let's say.
So look, I think when it comes to this classic all-round general purpose size of 10'6" by 32, 33, which has got to be the biggest selling sector of the market, I'm sure, then I think we can pretty safely say that there are no significant performance differences between inflatable and hardboard. Would you agree?
I would agree. I would give the one caveat, though, of beware the lowest price items you can find. The SUP-shaped objects, maybe. If you're a cyclist, about BSOs, bicycle-shaped objects that are sold at big box stores, but SUP-shaped objects that are marketed as paddle boards but are just super, super cheap, very flimsy, inflatables, and I've literally seen them fall apart straight out of the box before. So it's that's a caveat. I also give a caveat the other way of the same thing with hardboards. Those really inexpensive injection molded plastic boards that weigh 65 pounds and are 9.5 feet by 36. Like they're just these weird little things that that also are not good. So it goes kind of both ways there. But yeah, looking at a reasonable product.
Oh, totally. I mean, and let's not beat about the bush. The Honu Byron and the Glide Retro are really good inflatable boards. They've both done very well in our reviews. We like them, we rate them, we'd be happy to recommend them. They're quality products.
Absolutely.
So they are representing the good end of inflatable construction.
So, Bill, what about different shape paddleboards? What about touring paddleboards? That's kind of the next biggest category. Often people will start with an all-around board or a cruiser, and then they will, if they want something a little faster, a little spicier, they'll go to a touring paddleboard. So what about differences in shape here and how being a hardboard or inflatable might actually impact that?
Okay, so what we're now talking about generally are boards with a more pointed nose, possibly kind of a square tail, because we're moving away from any suggestion that this board is going to have a surfing potential or kind of that kind of general beach type use. So we're getting kind of into more narrow boards now, 32 max, I guess, most around about 30, aren't they? 30 inches wide.
Yeah.
And this is definitely an area where there are probably more hardboards around. And are we going to find any difference? My feeling again is that actually a good inflatable touring board will certainly be able to keep up with a hardboard. It might just come down to water conditions. What do you think?
I agree. I think we're talking about these longer, skinnier boards for more advanced riders, and there definitely are a lot of hardboards out there with some interesting shapes given to them in the name of efficiency, speed, water condition management, I guess. And in inflatables, you do have fewer shaping opportunities. There's not as much as you can do with them outside of the outline, the plan shape, and a bit of the rocker profiles. There are some inflatables out there that try to manipulate the hull shape a little bit in the nose, doing some fancy stuff with cutting some drop stitching and regluing. The Red Voyager does that. Sea Gods does that with a couple of their boards now. And I think we should probably have a whole nother video on displacement hull versus planing hull, and not get into that right now because I've got thoughts. But let's go to the video. Okay, so here's a prime example of what we're talking about with shaping. Again, this is the level 6. This is their 12.6 touring. And maybe from this angle it's a little hard to tell, but there's definitely a lot of shaping going on with this nose. And Bill, do you want to maybe, well, I guess we'll just watch some video first and then go into it. So the inflatable in the background there is the Hydrus Paradise, their 12.5-foot version. So both boards are 12.5 feet. They're both 30 inches wide.
So again, look, what we can really see here is that they're both cutting through the water very nicely. Both looking very comfortable. And no obvious difference there, is there?
No. And oh, we didn't reverse which one was in front for this, but that's okay. We'll see a front shot here in just a little bit. And that efficiency and the rocker profile, the change in the nose shape. With the hardboards, the rocker is built a little bit differently. You said it's more continuous typically. And you see more volume in the nose on these longer touring boards, on the hard boards. They have to put more volume in to give them more buoyancy.
Generally, this has got a lot to do with when you're using the boards in rougher conditions. It helps the nose pop if you actually stick the nose in, or just it rides a little bit higher up. As can clearly be seen on that hard board, they have built some more volume into the nose. Just to keep that up and high. But this kind of...
the inflatables kind of have that by virtue of being inflatable. Because they are thicker, they have that extra volume already.
Yeah, exactly. That's right, yeah.
Looking at that bow wake again, same kind of thing. We're seeing what looks to be maybe some splashier bow wake on the inflatable. And when you really look at the hardboard, though, you're seeing almost the same amount. It's just moved back, is what it looks like to me. It's moved back a little bit further on the board where it starts to splash out because it has the shape in the front.
And again, I would suggest that this is slightly more down to actual plan shape than materials. The Hydrus has a slightly more arrowhead nose to it, which does mean that the rails engage just a little bit further back, creating that kind of slightly more obvious plume of a bow wave that you're seeing there. But yeah, overall, not a lot of difference.
No, and I did pause here just to kind of show that thickness difference. So, Bill, where you're standing on the hardboard, it's still that 4-inch thick, kind of typical hardboard thickness, but it does get thicker up at the nose, and the rocker is not quite as distinct because it's more continuous. Whereas on the Hydrus, you can see it's the same 6-inch thickness, and you do get a little bit more of a distinct rocker starting just behind the logo here and moving up to the nose.
Yeah, Hydrus that was an interesting one to pick here because Hydrus are definitely one of the more innovative of the inflatable brands when it comes to just having a slightly more progressive rocker profile. They don't tend to have that kind of just turn up at the end like we saw very clearly on the Glide earlier. They have a slightly smoother rocker profile, which is definitely helping out in these conditions.
And so, but we're seeing, you know, touring boards, we're talking about efficiency and speed. And again, we're taking the same number of paddle strokes, the same intensity of paddle strokes. And I'm not falling behind. You're not overtaking. We are side by side. And I think, you know, in the speed testing that I've done, it's that plan shape. It's the shape of the board and the width that I think makes more of a difference that I've noticed with any board, whether it's hard or inflatable, for speed.
Absolutely, absolutely, every time. I think just the point you made earlier, well worth coming back to. We're talking about quality boards here, quality inflatables that have got a high density of quality drop stitch and good construction. Back in the early days of inflatables, 2008, 2009, when all the inflatables were long, thin, and 4 inches thick, then yes, absolutely, there was a huge difference. They were overgrown swimming pool toys. They did feel boingy, and you could feel the board flexing, and you could feel the water underneath the board kind of rattling the bottom of the board. Those days are gone. The quality of the good inflatables now, particularly the really well-made ones from the brands where they're using, you know, high-quality drop stitch, the good PVC and really well-made rails, the boards are feeling solid, and you're not getting that distortion that we used to have to deal with.
And when we're talking about flex, and especially in these touring boards are designed to go fast and efficient, when you flex the board, you lose your water line, it bobs, it twists, it does all sorts of things, so that rigidity is important. And another thing I'll add here for the inflatable, for touring, so if you are out fitness paddling, just for, you know, few hours in the afternoon or something, you know, not a big difference. But if you're loading up for a tour, for an overnight or a multi-day trip, and Bill, you were on that, if you were on that 12.6 from board that we just saw, there's not a lot of extra volume in there to account for your equipment. And not a lot of space either.
Yeah,
Whereas
no,
on that,
good point.
Yeah.
I mean, in inflatables, almost in any comparison we could ever do between a hard board and an inflatable board of a similar kind of general plan shape and dimensions, the inflatable is going to have more buoyancy. It just has to. There's no way around that. So it will always be able to carry more stuff, whether that's people stuff, dogs, pets, children, overnight stuff, more stuff. Inflatables win on that one.
You do get a different feeling in those choppy conditions. In really, really rough choppy conditions, I think there is, except for that upper echelon of really stiff inflatable boards, I think there is a bit of an advantage there for the hard boards that you're not gonna have that flex. And even in like the mid-range and upper mid-range boards, if it's really choppy, you're still gonna get some flex. But in the upper, you know, we've talked about, we're just looking at the Hydrus board, which I would put into the upper category for rigidity. But if you go to the topmost right now, you've got Isle currently with their Infinity fiber that is insanely rigid. And I think now that we're seeing technology like that, flex, we've barely talked about it this episode, but it's not as much of an issue as it used to be.
No, that's right. Yeah, I would agree completely.
Sure. So touring boards, Bill, do you think there's a big advantage one way or the other?
The only time I would really be looking for a hard touring board is in pretty rough sea conditions. Otherwise, I would be 100% happy, and I do jump on my inflatable every time. I don't think I'm going to be going any slower or restricted in any way by being on an inflatable. I'm not losing any performance.
Talking more about more specific boards, we're getting into more niche categories, so we'll maybe tighten it up and let people get back to their work from their lunch break or wherever they're watching this. But surfing is a really big one, and I am not a coastal paddler. Unfortunately, I don't live on the coast, but I know you do, and I know you enjoy a fair amount of surfing. Would you care to share some differences that you've experienced, inflatables versus hardboards for surfing?
Yeah, sure. I've surfed inflatables a ton of times. I've had a lot of fun on them, but up until very recently, it has been more just a case of that was the board I happened to have and I didn't have a hardboard to hand. And if I could have got on a hardboard, I would have. Inflatables, the only time that there would have been kind of maybe my first choice is if the surf is so tiny that it really just, it wasn't even surfing, it was just straight lining, catching a wave and riding it, in which case, yeah, you know.
And why was that why was your general go-to the hardboard, just for those who may not quite understand?
Being able to create thin rails and take all the volume out of the nose. You know, your surfing experience starts when you leave the beach. You've got to get out there to get the waves, which invariably, or almost invariably, means you've got to punch out through some broken waves over some white water, and get out through some waves that are still in the breaking phase before you get out the back. Inflatables, because they've got that big thick nose and there's no way around that, they get knocked around more. There's much more board up front, much more swing weight. So you kind of get stopped by every little bit of white water you've got to get over. And then when you get out there, yes, you can get onto the wave nice and easy, but because the inflatables don't have a kind of progressive rocker line, you've got to be really careful you don't end up just sticking the nose of the board straight into the water out front, which always results in a pretty gnarly catapult. And I've actually hurt myself a little bit doing that a few times. And this is one time when, even despite what we've been talking about, you did tend to feel the flex of the board. There are plenty of times when you're surfing when only the tail of the board is in the water and you've got a whole lot of board out front, and that's when you can kind of feel that kind of boingy nature of this big long thing flexing away in front of you. So yeah, I've had a bunch of fun surfing inflatables, but it wasn't really surfing. You're not cranking turns, you're not throwing spray, you're just messing around. Things have changed a bit now. Honu are leading the way. Their new Honu Byron inflatable SUP surf is an amazing piece of technology. It works really, really well.
Bondi, correct?
Honu Bondi. Sorry, what did I say?
Okay. Byron.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Okay, Honu Bondi, yeah. And yeah, I've had some great surfing on that. They make an 8.8 and a 9.5, and one of the main reasons it works is because they can make a really stiff board that's only 4 inches thick, but also because they've just put some incredibly high quality fins on. You still need to surf it in a different way. You cannot lay it in along a rail and crank a turn like you can a hardboard. You have to turn it off the tail. But you can chuck it around, and I've had a lot of fun on it. And, you know, yeah, if it's maybe waist high or less, I'd probably choose it over a hardboard, to be honest, because I can just have a whole lot of fun on it. So the inflatables are starting to catch up, but the harder, the faster the surf, the more critical, the more it comes back to you would choose a hardboard every time. And I think for an awful lot of the purists, they would kind of say, well, why do I even need to be thinking about inflatables? Because my SUP surfboard is 9 foot long. I can put that in the car, I can take that on a plane. I don't even need an inflatable. The advantages of an inflatable aren't really there in the same way as they are for cruising, touring, racing boards, that sort of thing. So I think the jury will probably always be on the side of hardboards when it comes to surfing, but inflatables are starting to catch up.
Okay, yeah. My very little surf experience, mostly on rivers, so I'm not even going to try to add to that. I'll take your word for it, Bill, and next time I go surfing, we'll see if I can get a couple different options under my feet to see how they go.
Okay, so Mike, I'll hand back over to your area of expertise then. Mm-hmm. What about on rivers? Which would you choose? You're a very experienced river paddler.
Yeah.
You've used, tell me about it.
100% inflatable. So I'm going to look at river paddling beyond the the casual float, because the casual float on a river, outside of a few safety things, particularly with leashes, is not really any different than flat water. So when we start getting into a faster river with currents, eddies, other features, and then whitewater, if you start getting into that, then you're going to start looking at a few different things. So with the inflatables, one of the biggest benefits is the durability. We already talked about it, but you can bang these things off of rocks, and they're fine. It's just another day for them. Hardboard, you might have a bad time. I even have a custom-made hard whitewater paddleboard that is designed for river play, and I have repaired that thing so many times. It weighs about 8 pounds more than it did when I got it. It's a fun board. It's great, but it's not. Even though it's built for rivers specifically, it's still not nearly as durable. And when you're getting into whitewater, you're using shorter boards that are they're shorter and wider, and those rocker profiles, so you get your progressive rocker in a hardboard and more of a kick rocker, not quite as progressive with an inflatable, but when they're shorter, when they're 8.5, 9.5 feet long, you can have tail rocker and you can have nose rocker, and it's getting pretty close to being progressive. And it does have to be aggressive. So if you're getting into larger whitewater, you need an aggressive amount of rocker. And so it's just not, the differences there aren't as big. You can still carve your turns. You can still control the board really easily. And the biggest thing there is just the benefit for the durability of the inflatable.
So it sounds like it's a slam dunk for inflatables when it comes to whitewater then.
Yeah, and I think if we've got the slam dunk of hardboards for surfing, we've got the slam dunk of inflatables for advanced river paddling, as I guess we'll put it that way. Well, that brings us to our last category of paddleboards, which is something that I know we both enjoy doing, which is racing. And well, much like surfing, the consensus has been it's got to be hard. It's got to be hard. It's not going to be any good if it's not. And let's go back to the video. Okay, here we go into the racing boards. So the hard board you see first here is an NSP Ninja. And this is, Bill, you and I are actually kind of giving each other a little bit of a, not a full race, but a little bit of a competitive push to each other. And the inflatable in the background there is the Starboard All-Star Airline. Bill, did you see anything in that video clip that stood out to you?
No, although I suppose the big takeaway really again is that there wasn't a major speed difference there. I remember what we did find was that the Ninja accelerated quicker from scratch, which you would expect from it being both a little bit stiffer and a little bit narrower. But when we were both going along side by side at kind of cruising pace, racing pace, or full-on flat-out sprint pace, there really wasn't much in it. And if anything, it felt like the Ninja was a little bit kind of looser underfoot. It was moving around a little bit more because it's narrower and more rolly, whereas the Starboard just gave an incredibly flat, safe platform, allowing you to really concentrate on your paddling.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. So the Ninja here is 25 inches wide, and it is dug out, which does add some stability, lowers your center of gravity. But the All-Star here in this case is 28, and that's actually the widest All-Star that Starboard makes. They bring it down to I think 24.5, and a couple of different widths in between. You see me on the left, and the amount that the board is just kicking side to side, rolling side to side, versus you being rock steady, and me having to think about my stability versus you're able to put everything into your paddle stroke.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And you can see the wind actually even picked up a little bit here compared to some of these other shots. So it's really kind of putting it on from the side.
That's right. There was a bit of work on the water, wasn't there? We should just add at this point, just for the viewers who aren't fully familiar with inflatable race boards, that you've always got to kind of underestimate or undervalue the width just a bit, because that rail shape, sorry, can't see that, can we? The rounded rail shape on an inflatable means that actually it's saying it's 28 inches wide, but it's probably more like 26 and a half. You always need to knock an inch or maybe even two off the width of an inflatable to get what's actually happening underneath, because they have to have those rounded rails.
And I do want to point out this shot. You can see the effect, that stability effect really well here. We're just standing, and you can see me wobbling from side to side on occasion. And this is actually, I think this is one of my favorite shots, and this is really, I think, kind of underrated, is you see how evenly we are turning. And that is all wind pushing us to the side, and we are turning completely in unison. And so often I hear, oh, well, inflatables are bad in the wind because they're 6 inches thick. And that's fine. It's 6 inches thick. Sure, I'll give it that that's thicker than a 4-inch board and maybe has a bit more windage. But here's a 9.5-inch thick hardboard, and it's also just eating up that side wind and getting turned around. So, okay, I guess I was jumping ahead of myself. Speed. You mentioned you didn't really notice a lot of difference. In our testing, we did some measurements with our GPS units and everything. We didn't find a whole lot of difference, like you said, on anything other than that acceleration at takeoff. And Bill, do you race on hardboards or do you race on inflatables? Or both?
I have both. I've got a pretty big quiver of boards here because I have the luxury of having a paddleboard school where we do a lot of race coaching. So I've got about 8 hard race board, 14 feet race boards to choose from, and probably about 15 inflatables of 14 foot in various thicknesses and widths. So I've got the full quiver. And I won't deny, at the last Nationals, New Zealand Nationals, I raced on hardboards. Because having just turned 60, I was really keen to win the over 60s category. Yeah, which went according to plan, fortunately. This year, I'm going to race on inflatables again, because generally I really enjoy racing on inflatables. There's nothing quite like going past somebody when you're on an inflatable and they're on a board that costs 3 times what yours did. So my conclusion is that the narrowest board that you can paddle will be the fastest board. And it doesn't matter actually whether it's an inflatable or a hard board. At the moment in our local paddling club, I am paddling on a 24-inch inflatable, which, so as I was just talking about, probably measures 22 and a half. It's the narrowest board out there, and I'm winning every race, and everyone else in the club other than me is on hard boards at the moment. And it's not because I'm a better paddler than them, it's because I'm on the fastest board. Well, yeah, I'm not going to go there, but I appreciate your support. There are some very fast paddlers in my club, but I can keep up with them and I can go past them because I'm on a narrower board.
And that takes a lot of skill to even just a 24 or 23, as you start to get under, I think 24, you start to get under 24, it takes a lot of dedication to learn to ride a paddleboard that narrow.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And it definitely helps if you're young and fit and you've got the balance of a panther. You know, it is very, very biased. Whereas for us gentlemen who've eaten a few too many pies, you know, it's just not going to happen. But the point is that inflatables just couldn't follow in that arms race. Hardboards were going down 24, 23, 22. You can't really make an inflatable that thin or that wide because you end up with this problem that it's still 6 inches thick almost invariably, and it just ends up kind of becoming more and more like a log, and so that's why inflatables dropped off the race circuit. But I'm excited now because we are seeing some of the quality inflatable brands who are able to make 4.7 inch, getting their boards much stiffer, as we've talked about, and I think inflatables can get back in the game. So watch this space.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So this year, so that NSP Ninja we saw in the video is my race board that I've had for 5 years, something like that. And this year, I've stopped bringing it to races. I've been using the Hydrus Elysium, 26-inch wide, so still not quite as narrow. But if you account for that rail radius, like you were talking about, 25-ish. And in my testing and in my results from these races, my speeds have not decreased at all from being on the NSP Ninja to going to the Elysium. So it is not a slower board. In my mind, that actually tells me that I am the slowest part of the equation there between the two boards. So no surprise for me. But so being able to easily pack that, and we don't have a lot of races in New Mexico, so I travel a lot. We drove 13 hours this last weekend round trip to do a race. So to do a 4-mile race is good. So being able to roll it up and put it in the back of the car as opposed to having to rooftop a 14-foot board, it saves me money too on gas, but also the cost of the board. These race boards are $3,000 plus US dollars, and that's not including delivery if you have to get it shipped where you're at. And you can't really take them on planes or anything. And a good racing inflatable is going to be between $1,000 and $2,000.
My dream is that if there was a really active inflatable race board circuit, that you could jump on a plane, go out, you could fly to the other side of the country, you could race anywhere. So easy, as you say, to get around with a good inflatable. And if all event organizers were to really recognize the value of attracting people with, real racing and real prizes for inflatables, it would absolutely revitalize the racing scene, because they are actually pretty damn good, pretty damn fast. You don't feel like you're not in a competitive situation. To be fair, and again, just because I know a few purists, I can actually picture them in my own club, in fact, who are going to come right back and say, whoa, what about when you're doing downwinders or it's cutting up rough? Yeah. Hardboards, probably for the same reasons as they do in surfing. For downwinders, I don't see inflatables making a serious dent in the quality and performance that a hardboard can give. But for racing on flat water, on lakes, on rivers, on harbours, estuaries, that sort of thing, then honestly, I don't think there's anything in it. The person on the narrowest board is probably going to win.
Yeah, I agree, and it's been my experience that that's exactly it. The narrower the board you can paddle in a race, the better off you're going to be. And so I personally, Bill, I think that this makes inflatables versus hardboards for racing pretty even. Very few advantages to hardboards in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I would agree. And for the top 1%, the people who are competing at the moment in the World Championships, they might be the ones who can leverage an extra tiny 1/4% out of a more progressive rocker line of a hardboard, that sort of thing. Good on them. But those people don't buy their own boards anyway. But for those of us who do,
or take them with them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. For us, for the 90% of people who want to just go and have fun and have a good club race or regional race or whatever, or I love the fact that ICF have an inflatable class in their World Championships. Bring it on. Inflatables have a lot to offer, and I'm really delighted how much better they've got over the last couple of years.
And I will say, Bill, this last race that I did, they had two divisions. They had a 4-mile and a 2-mile. And, the 4-mile, myself and another guy were the only ones on inflatable race boards. We finished middle of the pack. We're middle of the pack paddlers, so I'm not trying to go either way on that from the results. But the 2-mile race was almost entirely inflatable paddleboards, most of them all arounds. I think there was 1 or 2 touring boards in there. And those people had a blast. So racing isn't also just about going as fast as you can on the skinniest board you can. It's about that community and having fun and getting everyone involved with something.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's really good to hear.
And I know you and I can do this all day, so let's wrap it up for the folks at home watching this. And what do you think? Let's overall big picture, hardboards versus inflatables. Which one is better? Give us the 10
The
second.
the one with the better plan shape. It's not about the construction, it's about the shape. The better shape will be the better board every time.
I agree. I think we can call this fiction, this myth, mostly busted. There's still those instances where the hardboards do better with surfing and occasionally racing, but for 99.5% of paddlers out there, a hardboard is not inherently better. Like you said, it's all about the shape. It's all about the quality.
Yeah, absolutely. For every person I find who says, oh, I jumped off an inflatable and got on a hardboard and it was better, I've also encountered people who were very disappointed when they first got on a hardboard because it felt completely different and they didn't like the feeling. So often now it just comes down to what you're used to rather than actually any significant performance difference. Indeed, I'm going to stick my neck out here and I'm going to say that actually for the vast majority of beginners and intermediates, you're probably going to be better off with an inflatable. It's going to be cheaper, easier to store, easier to transport, softer when you fall and it hits you, softer when your board hits other people or boats or swimmers or super yachts or whatever. You know, you're less likely to end up in court with an inflatable. I think overall they are a really good option, and the fact that the market has worked that out for itself and 90% of boards sold are inflatables is a good thing. I have no problem with that as a professional paddleboarder.
No, I agree. I think that's great. So we've presented a lot of information here. It's been a pretty long video, and I think hopefully explained our points of view on these. And like a lot of the videos in this series, they are going to be kind of nuanced and probably a little long because of that, where the reason why there's so much confusion around these topics is because it's a confusing topic. There's a lot of different points to consider. So I enjoy breaking that down. That kind of goes with my analytical mindset. And Bill, I think you're a fantastic person to do that with. You've got so much experience here and so much just different board sports and different types of paddling. I think we hit a pretty good gamut. And
yeah, no, absolutely, Mike. I mean, and it is great to have these conversations. It's really good that we can bring this perspective and hopefully share some useful information and help make sense of it for people.
Yeah, and if you have enjoyed listening to us just prattle on about everything about paddleboarding and want to hear more of it, then make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channels, both Supboard Guide and Inflatable Boarder. We're going to be posting on both of them, I believe. And hit the bell, get notified when we put these new videos out. We're going to try to be a little bit more regular with this series. And if you have any questions or any thoughts, let us know in the comments below. Let us know how you feel. Have you used an inflatable and a hardboard? What did you like? What did you not like? And we look forward to producing more of these videos for you.
Absolutely. And also, if you've got any myths or fact or fiction questions, let us know, because again, we're only too happy to talk about paddleboarding. In fact, you're going to have a hard job stopping us.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much, Bill, for your time today, and I can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Nice one, Mike. Really enjoyed this conversation. Happy paddling, and yeah, speak soon.